In this series, I'm going over solutions to every algebra question on the SAT. This is part 5 about linear equations in 2 variables. This is going to be all of the questions that are listed as medium difficulty. Every question in this video will be 2 out of 3 difficulty, hence the medium, and the skill will be linear equations in 2 variables, all under the domain algebra. Every question has a question ID listed on screen. If you'd like to search for specific questions or question topics, check the video description where each question ID is listed along with a timestamp and a short summary of what the question is about. Here we have line K is defined by y equals negative 17 over 3 times x plus 5. Line J is perpendicular to line K in the xy plane. What is the slope of line J? All right, well, we know that a parallel slope, a slope of a parallel line will be equal to the opposite of the reciprocal of the original line. So for instance, if you had the line M and you wanted to make a perpendicular slope, then you do the opposite, which means you change the sign by multiplying it by a negative. So a negative would become positive, a positive would become negative. And the reciprocal means that you flip it. So it's the multiplicative inverse. If it's a fraction, the denominator becomes the numerator becomes the denominator. If it's not a fraction, you would just put it as 1 over that original number. So in this case, if your original slope was m, then the perpendicular slope would be negative 1 over m. Here we have our original slope. If you write out slope-intercept form, it's y equals mx plus b. So the slope is m, that's what you're multiplying x by, and our slope in this original equation is negative 17 thirds. That's for line K. We want line J, which again is going to be perpendicular, so you take the opposite of a negative is a positive, so it will become positive, and then you do the reciprocal of 17 thirds, so you put the 17 in the numerator down to the denominator, and 3, which is in the denominator, you move that up to the numerator, so it will become positive 3 over 17. That's all you've got to do. Line P is defined by 2y plus 18x equals 9. Line R is perpendicular to line P in the xy plane. What is the slope of R? Similar to the previous question, we just need to find the slope of this original line, and then we want to find the opposite of the reciprocal of that, and that will be our perpendicular slope. Now, to find the slope of this original line, the easiest way, in my opinion, would be to put that in slope-intercept form, which means essentially solve for y. We want to get the y alone. You do that by originally subtracting 18x from both sides so that we only have y's on the left side. 18x minus 18x is 0. We're left with 2y equals negative 18x plus 9. And then we solve for 2y. We want to solve for just 1y. So we would divide everything by 2. 2y divided by 2 is just y. And negative 18x divided by 2 will become negative 9x. It doesn't actually matter what the y-intercept is, so this plus 9 halves, you can leave it as 9 halves, or you could write plus 4.5. Again, it won't affect the actual slope, because for the equation of a line, if you put it in slope-intercept form, it's y equals mx plus b, where m is the slope and b is the y-intercept. Again, we're only focusing on the slope here. So in this case, our slope, our m value, will be negative 9. So the original line is negative 9. They want a perpendicular line. Perpendicular, you do the opposite of the reciprocal. Opposite means you change the sign, so negative will become positive. And for an integer value, to do the reciprocal, you just put 1 over that original number. So it'd be positive 1 over 9, or you just write it as 1/9. Now, if they ask for the parallel slope, then it's going to be the same slope. And if you ever wonder why it's going to be the opposite of the reciprocal, just think a perpendicular line means it meets at a 90-degree angle. Right? So if one of the lines is going up, right, it has a positive slope, then the perpendicular slope has to be going down, and vice versa. If the original one is going down, then your perpendicular slope has to be going up. So positive and negative. And why you have to do the reciprocal, if one of the lines is really steep, then the other one, to make 90 degrees, would have to be relatively flat. If both lines are steep, then that's not going to be 90 degrees. If both lines are flat, it's also not going to be 90 degrees. So that's why reciprocal will make it so that if the original line was steep, so in this case, negative 9, that's going down at a pretty fast slope, right? It's a pretty sheer slope, then the other one would have to be proportionally flat. So that when you do 1/9, that makes it go up 1 over 9 instead of up 9 over 1, and it will make it meet at a 90-degree angle. If you want to check it, you could graph this equation on your calculator. For some calculators, you don't even need to get the y alone. Others, you would need to solve for y, so make sure you do that correctly. And then just write another line that you could even make it y equals 1/9 x once you have your slope as 1/9. And then you'll see if those cross at what looks like it could be a 90-degree angle. Now make sure that your screen is not compressed in one of the directions, because sometimes you'll have the dashes going up for the y-axis, further apart or closer together than the x-axis, and then it might not look like it's 90 degrees when it actually is, or it could look like it is 90 degrees when it actually isn't. But in this case, our answer is 1/9. Line K is defined by y equals 17 over 7x plus 4. Line J is parallel, so in this case they're parallel. Parallel lines mean that they never cross, they have the same slope. Line J is parallel to line K in the xy plane. What is the slope of the line J? Well, in this case, because they're parallel, so we've got K and J, and I'm just, we don't necessarily know that J is beneath K, we just know that they're parallel, it could be above it. But the one thing, if they're parallel, they have the same slope. So if we can find the slope of K, which will just be 17 over 7, because if you write a line in slope-intercept form, it's y equals mx plus b. Our m value here, what we're multiplying x by, is 17 over 7. And again, for a parallel lines are defined by having the same slope. That's why they never cross, because they're going up at the same rate for y and then x. So our slope will be 17 over 7. You don't need a reciprocal, you don't need to change the sign. If you do either of those things, you'll actually be incorrect. A certain township consists of a 5-hectare industrial park and a 24-hectare neighborhood. The total number of trees in the township is 4,529. The equation 5x plus 24y equals 4,529 represents this situation. All right, so we can see 5-hectare industrial park, so it's 5 times x, and 24-hectare neighborhood, that's what the 24y is, and 4,529 is the total number of trees. That's going to be the total over here. So x must be the number of trees per hectare of industrial park, and y must be the number of trees per hectare of neighborhood. Which of the following is the best interpretation of x in this context? Well, it's getting multiplied by the number of hectares, which is 5. So again, if they're adding up to the total number of trees, then the reason you would multiply it by the number of hectares, it must be the number of trees per hectare of industrial park, because that's the number of hectares of industrial park. So it would be something like that. The average number of trees per hectare in the industrial park. Okay, that sounds good. I didn't say average, but it's not going to be actually uniform. So the average is what you're looking for. The average number of trees per hectare in the neighborhood, that would be y, right? That's why you're multiplying that by 24, the number of hectares of neighborhood. You do the number of hectares times the average number of trees per hectare. Will give you the total number of trees in neighborhoods. Again, that's not what we're looking for here, though. They want x. The total number of trees in the industrial park, no, that would actually be 5x, right? This is represented by 5x. And the total number of trees in the neighborhood, that would be the 24y, right? So this is x. This is a little bit confusing because x is also what I'm doing to cross out some of these answers. But our answer would be A, the average number of trees per hectare in the industrial park. A chemist combines water and acetic acid to make a mixture with a volume of 56 milliliters. The volume of acetic acid in the mixture is 10 milliliters. What is the volume of water in milliliters in this mixture? Well, it's just water and acetic acid. The total volume is 56, that's the mixture. The acetic acid was just 10 of them, so that means that the other 46 would have to be from the water. Assume that the volume of the mixture is the sum of the volumes of the water and acetic acid before they were mixed. Right? So they don't get any more or less dense, change the volume, and you have conservation of mass. So it's just going to be, I don't know why this one's in medium. I guess it's just because you have to be able to interpret it, or maybe they're trying to trick you that it sounds like it's harder than it is. I already put 46 there, but we would say this is the amount of water. So just to show the math of that, you subtract 10 from both sides, and that would give you 46. I think in my head, I thought of it as what do you have to add to 10 to get 46, or to get 56, and that would be 46. Right, and if you want to check it, then just plug it back in. 46 plus 10 is 56. Line T in the xy plane has a slope of -1/3 and passes through the point 9, 10. Which equation defines line T? So they give us the slope, that's -1/3, and they give us a point that's on the line. So they don't give us the y-intercept, we need to find the y-intercept. Now, we know that the equation of a line, and it is a linear equation, will be y equals mx, where m is the slope, plus b, where b is the y-intercept. So again, b is the only thing that we don't know here, but we can plug in what we've got. Y equals -1/3 times x plus b. And make sure your b doesn't look too much like a 6, because that could throw you off. All right, so just looking at it right away, we can eliminate a and b, because a has a slope of 13, b has a slope of 9. We know neither of those is correct. Now they just rewrote it as negative x over 3. Negative 1/3 times x is negative x over 3, right? So it's the same thing. So we just need to figure out if the y-intercept is 10 or 13. Now because they gave us the point, what you could do is plug x in and plug y into these c and d and see which one works. That's one solution. I would just solve for the y-intercept by plugging these points in as x and y with the b and then see what b would have to be. For instance, when x is 9, y should be 10. So we'd say 10 equals, again, we had our slope was negative 1/3. So negative 1/3 times x, which is our x value is 9, plus b. All right, so now we've got an equation, instead of with 3 variables, x, y, and b, we've got an equation with just one variable, just the b. All right, this is representing one point that has to be on the line because they gave it to us. So negative 1/3 times 9, 1/3 of 9 is 3, so it would be negative 3 plus b is equal to 10. Now to get the b alone, you just add 3 to both sides. 10 plus 3 is going to be 13. So 13 is equal to b. And if you plug that into the equation that we have here, so put this 13 in for this b, y equals negative 1/3 x, or y equals negative x over 3 plus 13. So that will be option D. And actually, you could have even solved it just immediately looking at this by process of elimination. Once we know that it's between C and D, and it's a line, there's only going to be one point on the line that crosses through the y value 10. Right? A line is not going to like loop back around, and I guess it would be more like this, right? It can't be a parabola. So if you've already got a point that is a y value of 10, that can't be your y-intercept. So we could have eliminated C right from the bat there without doing this math. But to be safe, I would just do it. It doesn't take that long to plug in your x and y values and algebraically solve for that y-intercept of 13. In the xy plane, line T passes through the points 0, 9 and 1, 17. Which equation defines line T? So for the equation of a line, they've got them in slope-intercept form here, which is very nice. But we want to find our slope and our y-intercept. That would be here, the m is the slope, the b is the y-intercept. What's nice is they gave us this point, the 0, 9, and that is your y-intercept. The y-intercept is when the x is 0, because it's when it crosses through the y-axis. So when your x value is 0, you're not to the left, not to the right of the y-axis, it's exactly on the y-axis, and you go 9 up. So we know our b value is going to be 9. Right, so we've got y equals mx plus b. That would be mx plus 9. Now, there are two ways you could solve it from here. You could figure out what was the slope in terms of how did you change from 0, 9 to 1, 17. So basically, how did you move in the y direction divided by how did you move in the x direction. Or if you want, you could even plug in this x value of 1 and this y value of 17 into the equation. So you'd say m times 1 plus 9 equals 17, and then you could solve for m that way. I'll just find the change in y over change in x. That's your slope. So slope is defined by rise over run. Rise is how much you're going up in the y direction. So we went from 9 to 17, which is a positive 8, change of 8. And then your x is just going up 1, from 0 to 1. So it's 8 divided by 1, which means our slope will be 8. Now, if we plug that in for our m value, we'd say y equals 8x plus 9. And that would be option D. Just to show that the other way would work if you want. Usually when you plug in a point, you're doing that to find the y-intercept, but it works with the slope as long as you have the y-intercept. So we said it was y equals mx plus b. We could rewrite that as if x is 1, y is 17. So put in 17 for y. Y is equal to m times x. Again, x is going to be 1 plus 9. And when you multiply that out, that's just m times 1 is just m. So we have m plus 9 equals 17. And you could subtract 9 from both sides to get the m alone. And we would still get that n is equal to 8. All right, so that doesn't take that much longer. Again, I would just do it as change in y over change in x. So make sure you're comfortable with what is slope and how would you find that. But yeah, if you want to do it in this other kind of algebraic form that's a little bit more similar to how you would find the y-intercept algebraically, then that's fine too. You'll get the same thing, y equals 8x plus 9. If the graph of 27x plus 33y equals 297 is shifted down 5 units in the xy plane, what is the y-intercept of the resulting graph? All right, well, we're shifting it down by 5. That would mean that the y-intercept goes down by 5, or any point on the line goes down by 5 in the y direction. The way I would do this is to put this in slope-intercept form. So you do that by getting y alone. You're essentially solving for y. So we'll subtract 27x from both sides to get your y's alone on the left side of the equation. That would leave us with 33y. The 27x is canceled out over here, so we're left with 33y equals negative 27x plus 297. Now we need to divide both sides by 33, because we have 33y, we want just one y, which is one y equals. So divide this by 33 and divide the other side by 33 as well. Now it won't actually matter for this 27 over 33 because they're not asking about the slope, they're just asking for the y-intercept. If you did need to reduce this fraction, you would just say, oh, there's a 3 in the top, there's 3 in the bottom, so it'd become negative 9 over 11 times x. So your slope is negative 9 over 11. But again, the important part is we've got y equals negative 9 over 11x plus what will be our y-intercept. The original y-intercept is 297 divided by 33. If you want to divide this without a calculator, you can just type that in. But 297, we're essentially dividing it by 3 and dividing it by 11. Because that's 3 times 11 is 33. And the trick for dividing something by 11 would just be to look if the hundreds place and the ones place when added together give you the place in the middle. In this case, 2 plus 7 is 9. If that's the case, then you can just make the hundreds place into your tens place and the ones place stays as the one place, because 27 times 11 would be 297. So if we divide it by 11, it's going to give us 27 over 3. And 27 divided by 3 is 9. So essentially 27 over 3 is 9. That means our b value at the beginning is 9. Then, remember, they did say to shift it down by 5. They were nice to not make 9 an option, thankfully. But all we have to do is subtract 5 from your y-intercept, because the y-intercept is just basically the starting point. So if you shift the starting point down, it shifts all the other points down. And 9 minus 5 will give us 4. So our final b value, right, if we think of 9 as our initial b value before the change, will be 4. And that could be written as 0, 4. For the y-intercept, the x value is 0. Right? That's why it's on the y-axis, because it's not to the left, not to the right. So it's an x value of 0. What is the slope of the graph of 10x minus 5y equals negative 12 in the xy plane? So we're just finding the slope. Now, to do this, you could put it into slope-intercept form, and you do that by getting y alone. So we would subtract 10x from both sides. That leaves us with negative 5y equals negative 10x minus 12. And then to get y alone, instead of negative 5y, you divide both sides by negative 5. Divide each term by negative 5. So negative 5 divided by negative 5 is 1. We get y equals negative divided by negative is positive. 10 divided by 5 is 2. So we'd have 2x minus, well, minus a negative becomes plus a positive. So this would be 2x plus, and then 12 fifths doesn't simplify. So we can leave that as 12 fifths. If you wanted to make it a decimal, it'd be something 2.4. But they don't really need the y-intercept. All they need is the slope. Our slope, when you have it in y-intercept form, is y equals mx plus b, where m is the slope. So m will be 2, the thing we're multiplying x by. That will be your answer. Now you could also think of it as standard form. So some people write it as ax plus by equals c. That's considered standard form for a line. And in that case, if you want to find the slope, it's always going to be negative a divided by b. Now the reason for that is essentially what we did. Right? You subtract ax from both sides, so you get negative ax on one side, right? Just like we had negative 10x. If a was 10, we ended up with negative 10x over there. And then to get y alone, you have to divide by b. So negative a over b. In this case, our a value, like we said, is 10, so it'd be negative 10 over, since it's minus 5y, that's the same as plus negative 5y. So our b value is negative 5. So it'd be negative 10 divided by negative 5, which would give you positive 2. The same answer. Now this only helps if you actually memorize this and feel confident in it, right? Negative a over b. But the reason that's even a shortcut is just the math that we did here. So I would recommend just solving it, getting it in slope-intercept form. If you feel really comfortable with your memorization skills, then just remember negative a over b is the slope of a line in standard form. On a 210-mile trip, Cameron drove at an average speed of 60 miles per hour for the first X hours. He then completed the trip, driving at an average speed of 50 miles per hour for the remaining y hours. If x equals 1, what is the value of y? All right, so he's going 210 miles. If he goes 60 miles an hour for x hours, and we said x is 1, so that 60 times 1 will be the distance, because distance is equal to velocity times time. Our velocity is 60 miles per hour. Our time is 1 hour. You can also think of it, if you write out your units, that's miles per hour. I know they usually write as mph on like a car, but in physics, usually you would write it like this because mi means miles. You get 60 miles per hour, that's miles divided by hours, times 1 hour, and the hours will cancel out, and we're left with 60 miles. Right, so you can think of it that way, or just 60 miles per hour literally means how many miles will you travel in 1 hour. So if you drive 1 hour, you go 60 miles. Right, so we've covered 60 miles in the first hour of the trip. What is the value of y? The rest we're going 50 miles per hour. So that's 50 times y. Again, velocity times time equals distance. Our velocity is 50 miles per hour, and y is our time. So what we've got here is that 60, which is how much we traveled in that initial 1 hour, plus 50y, which is what we have left, will be equal to the total trip distance, which is 210. Now to solve for y, you just subtract 60 from both sides. That gives us that 50y is equal to 210 minus 60 is 150. And now we have 50y, we want just y. Right? 50y is the distance we traveled. That means that in the second part of the trip, we traveled 150 miles. Now we know that, but we need to find how long did it take going 50 miles per hour to go 150 miles. And you could think of it as what times 50 makes 150, that'd be 3. Or if you want to follow your normal algebra pattern, you just divide both sides by the coefficient. So divide both sides by 50. 150 divided by 50 is 3. So that would be 3 hours. If you want to check that, just add it up. 60 times 1 gives you 60 miles. 50 times 3 is 150 miles. 60 plus 150 gives you 210. So that checks out. The table shows 3 values of x and their corresponding values of y. Which equation represents the linear relationship between x and y? All right, so they didn't give us the y-intercept. Sometimes they'll be really nice. I think those are more the easy questions, but it's not going to be that difficult to find. What we can find pretty easily is our slope. So if we remember that slope is change in y divided by change in x, we can figure out in this problem, the y is going up by 5. It's actually going up by 5 between both points. And then our x value is just going up by 1, which is pretty nice of them. So that means that we could say our change in y is 6, our change in x is 1, so 6 divided by 1 means our slope will be equal to 6. So right off the bat, we can eliminate a and b because they have a slope of 5, we want a slope of 6. Now we need to figure out which of these will be our y-intercept, 5 or 11. Without even doing any math, you can just see, well, the point where y is 11 is when x is 1. That's not our y-intercept. Y-intercept is when x is 0. So even if you might think of 1 as like a starting point, in this kind of problem, right, a linear equation, the starting point would be when x is equal to 0. So we could actually eliminate d right off the bat, again, not without doing any math. You can say that it's got to be c, but it's pretty easy. If you know your slope is 6, that means that to go backwards, right, to go from x equals 1 to x equals 0, you have to subtract the slope. You could basically think, what did you have to do to get from 0 to 1? You had to add 6 and move over 1. So, right, to move backwards, when you know this point is 1 comma 11, you'd go down 6 and then to the left 1. So down 6 from 11 is 5. Okay? Or you could plug in those points and figure it out that way as well. At a state fair, attendees can win tokens that are worth a different number of points depending on the shape. One attendee won S square tokens and C circle tokens, worth a total of 1,120 points. The equation 80S, okay, so S is the number of square tokens, so 80S, I assume if it's the total points, 80 is going to be the number of points per square token, because S is the number of square tokens. And then plus 90C, and C is the number of circle tokens, so 90 times C is the total points from circle tokens, where 90 is the number of points per one circle token, and that will be equal to 1,120, which was our total of the points. All right, so 80S plus 90C equals 1,120 represents this situation. How many more points is a circle token worth than a square token? Like I said, if S is the number of square tokens and C is the number of circle tokens, like they said, and we're trying to find the total points, right, when you add them up, then the things you're multiplying S and C by respectively are the number of points per one square token and the number of points for one circle token respectively. So 80 is the number of points per one square token. Square is 80 points. For a circle coin, that would be 90 points. Okay, and they're just asking how many more points is a circle token worth than a square token? Well, 90 is 10 more than 80, so it'll be 10. A lot of times the word problem ones, even if they're in medium difficulty or even hard difficulty, are not that hard in terms of the algebra. It's just a matter of, can you understand the situation without being provided or, really spoon-fed the information. In this case, you did, think about it a little bit, like why are we multiplying something by 80? Why are we multiplying it by 90? Well, if we're finding the total points and they gave us the number of coins, to find the total points, you need to find how many points per coin and multiply that. What is the slope of the graph of y equals 1/3 times the quantity 29x plus 10, closed quantity, plus 5x in the xy plane? We know that to find the slope of a line from its equation, if it's in slope-intercept form, we just need to find what the m value is, where we have y equals mx plus b. And b would be your y-intercept. We don't need the y-intercept here, we just need our slope. So to do this, we need to get all of our x terms together. Right now we've got this 1/3 that you need to distribute to the thing in parentheses, and then we've also got a 5x being tacked down at the end. So combine that so there's just one x term, and then we can determine what the coefficient is of that x term. That will be our m value. So 1/3 times 29 would be 29 over 3, right? 29 thirds. 29 is not divisible by 3, unfortunately. So we have 29 thirds x plus 10 thirds. 10 is also not divisible by 3, plus 5x. So that's our right side of the equation. Y can just stay alone on the left side. So now we need to combine our like terms, which we've got a 5x and a 29 thirds x. Both of them are x terms. And then the constant, the 10 thirds, would just be our y-intercept. And that doesn't actually matter for this question. But if they did ask, it would either be 10 thirds, or you could write that as 3 and 1/3, or 3.33 repeating. Right? But in this case, to combine these two, what I'm going to do is multiply 5x by 3/3. Which is just multiplying it by 1. It doesn't change the value. Something divided by itself is 1. I'm just doing that so it has a common denominator with the 29 thirds, and then it's easier to add. So we'll end up with 29 thirds x plus 5 times 3 is 15 thirds x. And then 29 plus 15 would give us 44. So we end up with 44 over 3x. Right? We have 29 thirds x's and then 15 thirds x's. You just add those two numbers, right? Basically add the coefficients, and you don't change the x part. That's still the variable, so the number of things we're counting. But we end up with y equals 44 thirds x plus 10 thirds. 44 thirds is still not divisible by 3, which makes sense if you added a constant with something that was not divisible by 3. The sum will still not be divisible by 3. So we'll just leave that as 44 over 3, and that is our slope. If you wanted to write that as a decimal, you would have to round it. I would just leave it as 44 thirds, but I think the SAT would probably accept. Let's see, 44 divided by 3 gives us 14.666 repeating, so like 14.67. I think they actually even accept 14.66. A lot of times they let you round down, which is interesting. Just basically they're saying if you just cut it off where it is, but I would probably put it as 14.67 if I'm going to do a decimal. They do, of course, let you round correctly. It's just they don't always penalize you if you round incorrectly. Again, I would leave it as a fraction. That's the easiest way. Here we have a linear equation on a set of axes. What is the equation of the graph shown? First, I'm going to look at the y-intercept, or starting point. So when x is 0, and where it crosses the y-axis, y is equal to -8. So we'd say our b value is equal to -8. That's, again, using the slope-intercept form, where y equals mx plus b, where, again, slope will be m, y-intercept is b. We want one that has a b value of -8. They're in slope-intercept form, and all of them have -8 as their y-intercept already, so that part didn't really help us narrow it down at all. But now we can look at our slope. And before I even calculate the slope, you can see it's going down, right? As it moves to the right, the line goes down, so that means our slope is negative, so we can eliminate b, which is a slope of +1, and d, which is a slope of +2. So now we're just determining, is our slope -1 or -2? And we can see that it also passes through our x-axis at x equals -8. So our x-intercept is -8. Now, because the x-intercept and the y-intercept are the same value, that tells me that our slope will be -1. Because basically that means you had to move down 8 at the same pace that you moved to the right 8. Right? So change in y over change in x, we went down 8, and then we went to the right 8. So that's rise is -8, run is 8, which simplifies to -1. All right, so if our slope is -1, we put that in for m. It gives us y equals -1x is just -x plus, well, plus a negative becomes minus, so it would be -x minus 8, which is option C. I would recommend, once you've got it, just check, looking at the line, does your answer make sense, just in case someone accidentally did the positive ones. Just be like, oh, well, it can't be positive because the line's going down. They did not make this perfectly to scale. You can see that in the x direction, the dashes are further apart than they are in the y direction. So you can't always just eyeball it and say, oh, like this is clearly not going down at the same rate that it's going to the right. Well, it actually is. It's just, again, the scale is a little bit off. And sometimes they'll play with that to throw you off. Here we have another line. So it's another graph of a line on a set of axes. This time it's just showing the first quadrant. So the graph shows the relationship between the number of shares of stock from company A, which is X. So X is the x-axis is where you're showing the number of shares of company A stock, and the number of shares of stock from company B, which is the y-axis. All right, so company B is your y, the shares of company A, again on the x-axis, and these are the shares that Simone can purchase. Which equation could represent this relationship? All right, so I guess she has a set amount of money, so it's how much could she buy with it? All right, so we have the x-intercept is 60, and your y-intercept is 40. What that would mean is that when your x value is 0, the y could be 40, or when the x value is 60, the y would have to be 0. All right, so those are 2 points that would have to be on your line. Now, which equation could represent this relationship? If they have it in slope-intercept form, which 2 of them are, so A and C are in slope-intercept form, then your y-intercept has to be 40. So it should be plus 40 at the end. They're plus 12 and plus 8, so we can immediately eliminate A and C. So that does mean that our equation is not going to be in slope-intercept form, but we can deal with that. Both of them have your value on the right side, which is like the total when you add them up. If you think of that in standard form for a line, standard form is AX plus BY equals C. That means your C value is 480. Right? They didn't actually give us any information about that in the writing of the problem. Right? It didn't say she has $480 to spend or whatever. But we can use that since we know that 480 is the C for both options and figure out values for A and B. So we know when X is 0, Y is 40. So that means B times 40 would be equal to 480, right? Because A times 0, that just cancels out. You don't have to worry about the A term. So if we want to think what times 40 would give you 480, you just divide both sides by 40, and that gives you 12. 12 times 40 is 480. So your B value, so the term in front of the Y, should be 12, which it appears in B. And now let's just check for the A value, because the A value, we know that when X is 60, Y is 0. So we could say A times 60 plus BY. Well, if Y is 0, you don't have to worry about the B term. So A times 60 equals 480. 60 times 8 would be 480, or you could divide both sides by 60. Just think, right, divide 480 by 10, it becomes 48. 48 divided by 6 is 8. So A would have to be 8. All right, so if we know our A value is 8, our B value is 12, we could rewrite that as 8x plus 12y equals, again, 480. They gave us the C value in the options, and that would be option B. The other way you could think of it is basically if your x value or your x-intercept is bigger than your y-intercept, then the thing you're multiplying x by should be smaller, right? Because it's like that's the most that you can buy. So essentially, if the number of stocks of A is more, if you can buy more of stock A, then it should be less expensive. And in this case, right, the coefficient in front of X has got to be the stock price of A. So 8 times 60, right, is going to be the same as 12 times 40. It couldn't be the opposite, right? You couldn't do 12 times 60 being the same as 8 times 40. So that's another way you could do it without doing the math. I always recommend doing the math to make sure that your answer is correct, but it's nice to have little strategies or shortcuts you could use. Say you were really pressed for time. Just like, all right, well, if you bought more of stock A, it should be cheaper. So that makes sense that it's 8 versus 12. If you bought less of stock B, that should be more expensive than A. An artist paints and sells square tiles. The selling price P in dollars of a painted tile is a linear function of the side length of the tiles, S, in inches, as shown in the table below. So S is the side length here. Right, that's like your input. And P over here is your price. Which of the following could define the relationship between S and P? Okay, well, here we can find our slope, because all of them are kind of in slope-intercept form. I mean, they are in slope-intercept form. Just think of P as the Y value here, and then your slope is what you're multiplying the S by. So as X goes up by 3, right, we can see it goes from 3 to 6, and then 6 to 9. That's plus 3. Or X is S, sorry. Your price goes up by 10. So it goes up 10 from 8 to 18, and then up another 10 from 18 to 28. So that is a linear relationship, but our slope would be change in this case, P, because P is in the place of the Y. It's like your rise over your run is going to be S. So change in S is in place of change in X, 10 over 3. So we need one of these that has a slope of 10/3, which that means we can eliminate A, which is a slope of 3, and D, which is a slope of 3/10. All right, so now we're just figuring out your y-intercept. Is it 8 or is it -2? Well, without doing the math, you can see that 8 is already on there. When X is 3, or when S is 3, P, the price, is 8. So that means that when S is 0, it can't be 8. So we could already eliminate B, but just to do the math, right, you would just do the slope backwards, right? Think about what would you have to add 10 to get to 8? That would have to be -2, right? Because that's when you're going up by 3. So you'd go up, or you'd go to the right 3 from 0, so 0 to 3. That means you have to go up 10. So -2 plus 10 is 8. If it helps, you could write that out. You could do it a little bit more algebraically or graphically, or just try to do it in your head like that. But we do know it has to be less than 8, and since you're moving the S value down by 3, then you have to move the P value down by 10. All right, so C, P equals 10/3 S minus 2. Your y-intercept is -2. Line K is defined by y equals 7x plus 1/8. Line J is perpendicular to line K in the xy plane. What is the slope of line J? All right, so this is going back to what we were doing at the beginning. A perpendicular line is going to have, if you have an original line and then you're trying to find a perpendicular line, you take the slope of the original line and you find the opposite of the reciprocal. So opposite means you flip the sign. If it's negative, it becomes positive. If it's positive, it becomes negative. You can think of that as multiplying it by -1 or even dividing it by -1. It's the same thing. And then the reciprocal is the multiplicative inverse. So if it's a fraction, you flip it. Right? The numerator becomes the denominator becomes the numerator. If it's an integer, you just do 1 over that number. Now, if it was something like 1/3, right, when you flip it, it would become 3 over 1, which is just 3. But that doesn't matter for this problem. Here we have line K is defined by y equals 7x plus 1/8. So if you think of that in slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b. M will be your slope, so that's what you're multiplying the x by, it's the coefficient. So of line K, your slope is going to be 7. Line J is perpendicular, so you would do the opposite. So the opposite of a positive is a negative. You make that +7 into a negative. And then of the reciprocal of 7, you flip it. Again, if it's an integer, you just do 1 over that number. So it's going to be -1/7. That'll be B. I explained this earlier, but again, if one of the lines is a positive slope, it makes sense the other one would have to be negative, because for them to be at a 90-degree angle, which is what perpendicular means, then one of them's going up, one of them's going down. And the reason you do the reciprocal, if one of them is steep, like m is 7, so it's going up 7 over 1, up 7 over 1, like that, then you can't have the other one be -7. That's not perpendicular, right? You can see that's a really acute angle here, really obtuse angle there. You would need it to meet at a much flatter slope like that. So down 1 over 7, down 1 over the 7. Right? So it's proportionally flat. You think of it as, right, for every amount that this is going up, this one's going over. Okay, so that's -1/7. In an article about exercise, it is estimated that a 160-pound adult uses 200 calories for every 30 minutes of hiking and 150 calories for every 30 minutes of bicycling. So let's just underline 200 calories for every 30 minutes of hiking and 150 calories for every 30 minutes of bicycling. So we've got the red is for the hiking stats and the purple is for the biking stats. An adult who weighs 160 pounds has completed 1 hour of bicycling. Based on the article, how many hours should the adult hike to use a total of 1,900 calories from bicycling and hiking? First, I'm going to write out an equation. Now, you would be tempted to make 200 one of your coefficients because it's 200 calories per hour, or per 30 minutes. But since they gave us 30 minutes, that's like half an hour. It's more useful to know how many calories you'd burn per hour of that activity. So what I'm going to do is double that 30 minutes, which becomes 60 minutes, and then you would double the amount of calories. So if you do 200 calories per 30 minutes, that's going to be 400, 200 times 2 calories per hour. And we can do the number of hours of hiking can be h. And let me write that. Let h equal number of hours hiking. Now, you don't need to write let statements on the SAT, but it could potentially help you to keep track of your variables in case you come back to it later. Next, we have 150 calories per 30 minutes of bicycling. Again, we want to know how many per hour, not how many per half hour. 30 minutes is half an hour, so double both of these. We get 150 calories per 30 minutes is equal to 300 calories per 60 minutes or per hour. And I'll do that as B, the hours biking. Let B equal the number of hours biking. Now, they say you want it to total to 1,900 calories of just biking and hiking. So plug that in. And they gave us, which one did they give us? They have already completed 1 hour of bicycling. So biking, that means our b value is equal to 1. So we can plug that into our equation. We get 400 times h plus 300 times 1, that's just going to be 300, is equal to 1900. Now we want to solve for the number of hours hiking, I assume. Based on the article, how many hours should the adult hike to use a total? Okay, so we want to find out what should h be to make that add up to 1900. So we just want to get the h alone. We could start by subtracting 300 from both sides. Again, 300 times 1 is 300. So that will give us 400h equals 1900 minus 300 is 1600. Now you could think, what times 400 is 1600? That'd be 4. Or if you want to do the opposite of times 400, you would do divide by 400 on both sides. And then basically 10 divided by 10, 10 divided by 10, those cancel out. And then 16 divided by 4 is 4. And then over here, 400 divided by 400 is 1. So we get h is equal to 4. So you want to do 4 hours of hiking. And if you want to check that, just plug it back in. 4 times 400 is 1600, plus 300 times 1 is, right, 1600 plus 300 is 1900 total calories. A total of 2 squares each have a side length r. We've got 2 squares, so they're congruent because both of them have side lengths of r. Squares mean all of the sides are the same, all of the angles are 90 degrees, it's a 4-sided shape. A total of 6 equilateral triangles each have a side length t. All right, so we've got 6 of these, where it's t, 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 and I'm going to be lazy and just copy these 2 and paste them that. So now we've got 6 of them. One of these squares and triangles shares a side. Oh, none of these. Okay. None of these squares and triangles shares a side. The sum of the perimeters of all these squares and triangles is 210. Which equation represents this situation? We've got 4 r's per square, and there's 2 of those. So we can do 4r times 2, and then down here we've got 3 t's per triangle, and we're multiplying that by the 6 triangles. So let's see, did they simplify? They did simplify. So 4r times 2 equals 8r, and 3t times 6 is going to be 18t. 8r plus 18t is equal to the total number of, well, not number of sides. The number of sides would just be 18 plus 8, but this will be the total lengths. So the total perimeter is 210, they said here. All right, so we want something like this. They could reverse the 8r and 18t. That'd be the commutative property of addition. It doesn't actually matter what order you add 2 things. But we've got 18r plus 18t, that's option C, is equal to 210. So we've got when line n is graphed in the xy plane, it has an x-intercept of -4, 0. So it means when y is 0, x is -4, and a y-intercept of 0, 86/3. So when x is 0, right, the value is 86 divided by 3. What is the slope of the line n? Well, we could just figure out what's the change in y divided by the change in x. You can also think of that as rise over run. So in this case, our y value went from 0 to 86/3, so that's a change of positive 86/3. And our run, our change in x, went from -4 to 0, that's a change of 4. So that would be 86/3 divided by 4, which will just be 86/12. So that's not an option, but both of these numbers are even, so you can simplify it at least a little bit. If we divide both of them by 2, 86 divided by 2 is 43. 12 divided by 2 is 6. So 43/6. They don't share any common factors. 6 is 2 times 3. 43 is not divisible by 2 or 3. Now if we look over here, 43/6 is option C. So that's all you've got to do, change in y over change in x between the 2 points. It doesn't actually matter that there's an x-intercept and y-intercept, other than it makes the math a little bit easier. Right? If they weren't going from 0 to something or from -4 to 0, then you would actually have to do a little bit of subtraction in your head or on the paper or with your calculator. But that simplified it a little bit. In the xy plane, line K passes through the points 0, -5 and 1, -1. Which equation defines line K? Well, before we even look at the options, we've got 0, -5. That's when x is 0, y is -5. So that's going to be your y-intercept, right? It's where it crosses the y-axis. That means the x value is going to be 0. So if you wrote it as y equals mx plus b form, so slope-intercept form, it would be y equals something x plus -5, which is just -5. So we can look right away, we can see it's not going to be C, it's not going to be A, because those have plus 1/4, they're written in slope-intercept form, but they don't have -5 as your y-intercept. Now we need to find our slope. So the fact that they gave us 2 points makes it pretty simple to find our slope. We just do the change in y, also called the rise, and that went from -5 to -1, that's going up by 4. If you want to write that out, you can do -1 minus -5, which is -1 plus 5 is 4. I'm just thinking how much you have to move up from -5 to get to -1. And then the x went from 0 to 1. So that's a run, or change in x, of 1. So 4 over 1 gives us 4. Our slope will be 4. So we can put that slope in for the m value. We get y equals 4x minus 5, which is option D. Characteristics for rock types. All right, so they gave a bunch of rock types. We've got weight per volume. So this is kind of like the density. That would technically be mass per unit volume. But we could think of it for this problem as density. And then the cost per pound. A city is planning to build a rock retaining wall, a monument, and a garden in a park. The table above shows 4 rock types that will be considered for use in the project. Also shown for each rock type is its weight per volume in pounds per cubic foot. So again, that's kind of like the density. And the cost per pound in dollars. Only basalt, granite, and limestone will be used in the garden. So not sandstone. The rocks in the garden will have a total weight of 1,000 pounds. If 330 pounds of granite is used, which of the following equations could show the relationship between the amount x and y in feet cubed for each of the other rock types used? They said only basalt, granite, and limestone will be used. We're not using sandstone. So that's kind of more of a reading comprehension part of the problem, to just make sure you're not doing the math for that. If 330 pounds of granite are used, the 330 is already used, and it's going to be a total of 1,000 pounds. We could say, well, 1,000 pounds minus 330 pounds of granite would leave us with 670. So I assume it's going to be one of the ones with 670 because the 330 is already factored into the 1,000. And they don't have plus 330 on the left side of any of the equations. So I'm going to cross off B and D. We could uncross them off if we realize that they were right, but I think that's going to be the case. Now, X is the amount of, well, it doesn't actually say. Granite is already taken for. So granite was the 165, which means that the other 2 rock types are going to be basalt and limestone. So one of them should be 180, one should be 120. Just looking at it, right, 180y, that would be the basalt. So 180 times the amount of basalt. They don't tell us which one it is, and they're not done in order, which is a little bit annoying. But then this one is 120x, which could be limestone, right? And it has nothing to do with the cost. So in this case, the cost per pound is, you could consider it a red herring, or just that would be something you'd use for a different problem. But in this case, we don't actually care about the cost of it. They don't say it has to add up to this amount, or this is the budget that you have saved for it. All they tell us is that the weight will be a total of 1,000 pounds. And X is going to be the volume in feet cubed. So if you multiply the density, or what we're calling the density, which is pounds per feet cubed, by the amount of feet cubed, it would leave you with the pounds. So in this case, that means that X would have to represent the volume of limestone, and Y would have to represent the volume of basalt. When you multiply 120 times the volume of limestone, it gives you the pounds of limestone. Add that with 180 times the volume of basalt, which gives you the amount of pounds of basalt. And you can add up, you get the pounds of limestone plus the pounds of basalt, which have to add up to 670, so that when you add in the 330 pounds of granite they told us we already have, it would be 1,000. So that's where C is coming from. This one, really, it's more of a reading comprehension problem than anything, and then knowing how to use the numbers. But I like this problem. Just read carefully and make sure you're keeping track of the names of them. They were a little bit annoying in that they didn't do them in order, and they didn't tell you what X corresponds to or Y corresponds to. They just said for each of the other rock types used, and you have to also figure out sandstone is not used. So again, that's where the reading comprehension came in. This sentence is how we knew it wasn't sandstone, and then they told us there's 330 pounds of granite. So when they say the other ones, it had to be just referring to the basalt and the limestone. What is the slope of the graph of y equals 5x over 13 minus 23 in the xy plane? All right, well, to find the slope, if it's written in slope-intercept form, which is y equals mx plus b, the plus b is your y-intercept, the slope is the m, what you're multiplying x by, and 5x over 13 is the same as 5 over 13 times x. So the thing that we're multiplying x by here is 5/13. That will be our answer. Figure A and figure B are both regular polygons. The sum of the perimeter of figure A and the perimeter of figure B is 63 inches. So just before we move on, regular polygons means that it's a polygon where all of the angles inside are the same, all of the sides have the same length. Not necessarily that all of the sides of A are the same as the sides of B. They didn't tell us that yet. But it means that all of the sides in A, all the sides that make up A are equivalent to each other. All of the sides that make up figure B are congruent to each other as well. The equation 3x plus 6y equals 63 represents this situation, where x is the number of sides of figure A and y is the number of sides of figure B. X is figure A, which we're doing 3 times the number of sides. So 3, that means 3 is the length of each side, if you're multiplying it by the number of sides. And then y is the number of sides of figure B. So each of the sides on figure B must be 6, right? They're all the same as each other. Which statement is the best interpretation of 6 in this context? Again, 6 is the length of the sides of figure B because there are y of them. You're multiplying 6 times y. Each side of figure B has a length of 6 inches. Okay, that sounds good to me. The number of sides in figure B is 6? No, again, y is the number of sides. They told us that right here. You're multiplying that by 6. Each side of figure A, it doesn't have anything to do with figure A, right? Figure A is the 3x part. So each side in figure A has a length of 3 and there are x sides. All right, so it's just going to be A there. Each side of figure B has a length of 6 inches. 2.5b plus 5r equals 80. The given equation describes the relationship between the number of birds B, so B is the number of birds, we're multiplying that by 2.5, and the number of reptiles R, so we're multiplying the number of reptiles by 5, that can be cared for at a pet care business on a given day. All right, so it's adding up to 80. I assume 80 is going to be something about like the number of man hours or something that can be worked, but we'll figure out. If the business cares for 16 reptiles on a given day, so 16 is going in for R, how many birds can it care for on this day? Okay, so we don't even actually have to know what the numbers represent. It's just basically, I assume it's going to be something with staffing or space, whatever, and each reptile requires 5 units of space, each bird is 2.5, or again, it could be hours. We don't need to know what it is though. They're giving us the value of R, which is the number of reptiles. We just plug that in, we have to solve for B. So we have 2.5b plus 5 times R, and that's the 16 reptiles, and those two will add up to 80. Now 5 times 16 is 80, so we have 2.5b plus 80 equals 80. Well, if you subtract 80 from both sides to get this b term alone, you're left with 2.5b is equal to 80 minus 80 is 0. So that means you can't have any birds. If you want to check it, just do 2.5 times 0 is 0, plus 5 times 16 is 80, 0 plus 80 is 80. All right, so I guess 16 is the maximum number of reptiles that you could have, and that means you have no space left or no time left for the birds. The table shows 3 values of x and their corresponding values of y, where n is a constant for the linear relationship between x and y. What is the slope of the line that represents this relationship in the xy plane? Well, n is a constant, so all we need to know is the slope, and if you're adding n to each term, you could basically think of it as the y-intercept. It is the y-intercept because when x is 0, the y value is n, and the y-intercept doesn't actually affect the slope. If you think of, if you have a set of axes and you have parallel lines, they'll have different y-intercepts, but all of them have the same slope. So it doesn't matter where they cross through the y-axis. All that matters is the rate of change in y divided by change in x. So that means for this problem, you could even treat n as 0. You could treat it as whatever you want. If there's another number that you think will make the math a little bit easier. So when x goes down by 3, the y value goes up by 92. You could also think of that as when x goes up by 3, the y value goes down by 92, right? And that trend continues here. And we're just basically confirming that it is a linear relationship here. But so we could write that as change in y over change in x. The change in y, it either goes up 92 while the change in x goes down by 3. Or again, you could write the reverse of that. Or you could write that inverted, so you could do going down 92 every time x goes up by 3. It's the same thing. Negative divided by positive, the same as positive divided by negative. In this case, right, these don't simplify. 92 over 3, 92 is not divisible by 3, but it's just going to leave you with a negative 92 over 3, which is option A. A neighborhood consists of a 2-hectare park and a 35-hectare residential area. The number of trees in the neighborhood is 3,934. The equation 2x plus 35y equals 3,934 represents this situation. So we can see that the 2 from the park is represented in this 2x part as the coefficient of 2x, and the 35 from the residential area, that's the number of hectares in that, will be represented in this coefficient in front of the y. So I assume that would mean that the x is going to be the number of trees per hectare in the park. The y is the number of trees per hectare in the residential area. So when you multiply those and then add them up, do that sum product there, it will give us the total number of trees. Which of the following is the best interpretation of x in this context? So just to refresh, we've got 2 times x, which is the number of hectares of park area, times x. X is going to be the per unit. So per hectare, each hectare of park area would have that many trees in it, or that's the average number, I guess you'd say. The average number of trees per hectare in the park. Right, so that sounds good, A, and just let's rule out the other ones. I always say process of elimination can help you to find an answer you don't know. Right, you can rule out the options that you know are not true, or after you know what the answer is, it's a good way to check to make sure that you got it right. If one answer is right on a multiple choice option, the other ones should all be wrong. So the average number of trees per hectare in the residential area, that would be y, right? We're multiplying that by the number of hectares of residential area, 35y. The total number of trees in the park, no, that was given to us. That would be the 3,934. Oh wait, no, that in the park. That was not given to us, actually. That would be 2x, right? So the number of hectares times the number of trees per hectare. The total number of trees in the residential area, that would be the 35y. Right, again, the number of hectares of residential area times the per unit, the trees per unit area. So A would be our option there. We've ruled out B, C, and D. Now we have 2x plus y equals 37. In triangle QRS, sides QR and RS each have a length of x centimeters, and side SQ has a length of y centimeters. We quickly draw this out. It's not necessarily to scale, but we could have QR and RS are the same, and they're both x. This is an isosceles triangle. And then the other side down here, SQ, is going to have a side length of y. The given equation represents this situation. So 2x, that's x plus y, adds up to 37, which if we're adding up all the lengths of the sides is going to be the perimeter. So 37 is the perimeter of this triangle QRS. Which of the following is the best interpretation of 37 in this context? Well, as we just said, you're adding up all the side lengths. So this 2x plus y equals 37, that's representing your perimeter. So the difference in centimeters between the lengths, nope, it's not something about the difference. The difference in centimeters between the lengths of sides QR, nope. The sum of the lengths in centimeters of the 3 sides, that's another way of defining the perimeter. You're just adding up the 3 sides of a triangle or adding up all of the sides of a different shape. And the length in centimeters of one of the 2 sides, no, again, you're adding up all 3 of them, so it's not just one of them. All right, so that would be C. What is the slope of the graph of y equals 1/4 times the quantity 27x plus 15 and quantity plus 7x in the xy plane? Well, if we had our equation in slope-intercept form, which is y equals mx, where m is your slope, plus b, where b is your y-intercept, then the slope would be the m value. As it is right now, we would need to do the distributive property and then combine like terms so that we have all of our x terms together. Because we've got a 7x over here, we've got a 27x that needs to be multiplied by this 1/4, as well as the plus 15 needing to be multiplied by the 1/4. The only thing that would actually matter for the slope would be the 27x and the 7x terms, but we could do this pretty quickly. So 1/4 times 27x gives us 27x over 4 plus 15 over 4. Again, that's just going to matter for your b term, your y-intercept, and then we still have the 7x staying as is. So the x terms that we need to combine are 27x over 4, or 27/4 x, plus 7x. We already have y alone on the left side, so we can just leave that be. Now, to combine these without using a calculator or using decimals, we can just find a common denominator, and we'll do that by multiplying the 7x by 4 over 4. Now, that's multiplying it by a form of 1. 4 divided by 4 is 1. So when we do this, it doesn't actually change the value. It will just rewrite it as we have 27x over 4 already, and then 7 times 4 over 4 will give us 28x over 4. So 27 plus 28x. That's the number of x's divided by 4. And then our y-intercept will just stay as plus 15 over 4. You could write that as 3.75. Again, it doesn't actually matter for this problem because all we're looking for is that slope, the m value. So 27 plus 28 would give us 55x over 4. 55 is not divisible by 4 or 2, so we would just leave that as is. And again, our y-intercept doesn't matter for this, but we get y equals 55x over 4 plus 15 over 4. And that means that our m term, the thing we're multiplying x by, is 55 over 4, which is our slope. A line passes through the points 4, 6 and 15, 24 in the xy plane. What is the slope of the line? All right, well, slope we know is equal to rise over run, which you could write as the change in y, change in the vertical direction, divided by the change in x, the change in the horizontal direction. So for our change in y, we'll look at the y term of 6 and 24. That went up by 18. You could write it as 24 minus 6, but I'm just saying what do you have to add to 6 to get 24? That would be 18. So our change is a positive 18. In the x-coordinate, we went from 4 to 15, so we had to add 11 there. Again, you can write that as 15 minus 4, if that will help you. I'm just going to write 18 divided by 11. Now, those have no shared common factors. 11 is prime, and these two numbers are relatively prime. So we just circle that. That will be our answer. 18 over 11 is our slope. A line in the xy plane has a slope of 9 and passes through the point 0, -5. Well, since the x-coordinate is 0, this is actually our y-intercept. So that means that our b value would be -5 if you write it in slope-intercept form, which is y equals mx plus b. Again, m is the slope, the b is your y-intercept. Here, they actually wrote the same thing, except they did p instead of m and r instead of b. That defines the line, or the equation y equals px plus r defines the line, where p and r are constants. What's the value of p? All right, well, we know that r is -5. That's the thing that we had just said. That doesn't actually matter for this problem, but we'd have y equals something x minus 5, and now we're just trying to figure out what would that m value be, and they said that our slope is 9. So it was already given to us. We're just interpreting what I called our m value, what they're calling our p value. Our slope will be 9. That question is basically just testing whether you can interpret what slope-intercept form means, and you're not just memorizing m is slope. You have to know, oh, it's the coefficient that you're multiplying x by when you have y alone on the other side. In the xy plane, line S passes through the point 0, 0 and is parallel to the line represented by the equation y equals 18x plus 2. So first of all, a parallel line means that it has the same slope. Parallel lines will never cross. They have the same slope. Right? That's why they're staying the same distance apart the entire time. So if we look at the equation here, y equals 18x plus 2, our slope is 18. It's what we're multiplying x by. So that means the slope of our line, S, will also be 18. If line S also passes through the point 4, D, what is the value of D? Well, since we're given that it passes through the origin, 0, 0, and we know our slope is 18, that means it's going up 18 over 1. That would be 1, 18. And then it goes up another 18. Let me move this down so I have a little more space, because I could have drawn it less to scale, but it would go up another 18 to 36. That'd be 2, 36. Then another 18 to 3, 54. And then another 18 to 3, 72. So our answer will be 72. If you want to check that, you could say we have y equals mx plus b. Our b value is 0. If the y-intercept is the origin, then you're adding 0 to it. So it's essentially just going to be y equals mx, where our slope is 18. So y equals 18x. And then you want to solve for when x is equal to 4. So plug that 4 in for x. What would be y? We get y equals 18 times 4, which 18 times 4 will be 72. Right, so 72 is our answer there. A store sells 2 different sized containers of blueberries. The store's sales of these blueberries totaled $896.86 last month. The equation 4.51x plus 6.07y equals 896.86 represents this situation, where x is the number of smaller containers. Okay, so x times 4.51, that would mean that 4.51 is the price of one of those small containers. And y is the number of larger containers sold. So y is being multiplied by the price of one of those large containers, which would be 6.07. Because when you multiply the price times the number sold, that would be the total revenue from those containers. According to the equation, what is the price in dollars of each smaller container? So the smaller was the x is the number of smaller containers. We're multiplying that by the price to find the total revenue from smaller containers. So that'd be 4.51. And that's the last question. All right, so just revisiting, what were these problems? A lot of them were just interpreting word problems, interpreting equations that have to do with word problems. What does the coefficient mean in this case? What does the variable mean in this case? And just explaining that. We had a lot of slope questions, parallel lines, perpendicular lines came up a little bit. Some were asking about y-intercepts, so just knowing how to interpret if this line is parallel, then they're going to have the same slope. If they're perpendicular, they have opposite reciprocal slopes, and then applying that, trying to find what the y-intercepts are or when it would pass through a certain point using those parallel and perpendicular slopes. Also, being able to interpret what does the slope mean in context, what does the y-intercept mean in context. Here we have, another one that's interpreting the slope. Some of them just gave you different points. You need to find the slope like this, so change in y divided by change in x. Also, you could think of it as rise over run. Some people write it out like this, where they write the slope is equal to y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. That's literally just change in y over change in x, right? So change is figuring out how much it went down or up from one to the next. So just the main thing, if you do it this way, make sure that you line up the points correctly. It doesn't matter which one is going to be x1 comma y1, which one's going to be x2 comma y2. It doesn't have to go from small to big on the top or on the bottom, because if it is a negative slope, then one of them will be negative, one of them will be positive. If it's a positive slope, then they're either both going to be positive or both going to be negative. So your signs will work either way. Just make sure that if you choose a certain point to be x2 on the bottom, that has to be first, right? The thing that's being subtracted, or that x1 is being subtracted from. Just make sure that whichever point you choose to have be like x2, that same point is being used for y2. And similarly, whichever point is being used for x1, the same one is being used for y1. So they have to be lined up like the top and bottom for the same point. All right, we had some distributive property and applying that to find the slope, right? They give you something that's not quite in slope-intercept form. You have to get it into slope-intercept form. Some of them, we had to get rid of something in front of the y side as well, where like y was not alone. So just getting y alone and then making sure we don't have any parentheses, and you have it as mx plus b, so you can properly interpret what's the slope, what's the y-intercept. They did have, this is another one that's kind of a word problem, interpreting what the variables would mean based on the situation they gave you. They have a couple like this where they might define what the coefficients mean in the context, and then they just give you the variables, and you have to figure out based on what the total was, based on what the coefficients mean, as they told you, what do the variables mean in this case. Here's another slope one. This one, they try to throw in this constant thing. Constant just means it's a value that's not going to change throughout the problem, unlike a variable which will change at different points. It's another one in context where they gave you the definition of the coefficients. This one you have to actually solve it. So if they gave you one of the values, or they gave us what the variables are in this case, they didn't actually tell us where the coefficients come from. You could try to interpret it, but it doesn't really matter. So they said, if this variable is this, then plug that into the equation, solve for the other one. Seems like they had a couple that had to do with like perimeter, trying to tie in some level of geometry or other level of math, just in a word problem. You don't actually need to really know so much geometry to be able to understand it. They didn't even expect you to know the word perimeter in this case. Well, I guess they had perimeter right there. But it's just, again, this one is a combination of kind of reading comprehension and understanding algebraic equations with two variables. Another slope question. This one is just basically, they gave you it already in slope-intercept form. The only thing that could potentially confuse someone who's really new to algebra, they might think that 5x over 13 is different from 5 over 13x. But you can even think of that as the commutative property of addition. But you could even think of that as the commutative property of multiplication, right? If you multiply 5 times x and then divide it by 13, that's the same as multiplying by 5 by 1 over 13 and then multiplying by x, right? So it's something like that. Here was another word problem. This one used a table. They gave us some red herrings. They gave us the sandstone you didn't need to use. They gave us that the granite was already a value that was given, the 330 pounds, so you didn't need to use that 165. And then you didn't even need to use this column, the cost per pound, at all. So just, again, that's more of a reading comprehension question that involves algebraic thinking. Here's another slope-intercept form. This one was just finding the slope and then using that, and they gave us the y-intercept, so knowing what the y-intercept would look like as a point. There were a couple questions that gave us the x and y-intercept, so like these. In this case, it was just to find the slope, so it's the same as if they just gave us 2 points, but there were some where, that could actually help. Here's another perimeter word problem question. This was a hiking word problem question, again, interpreting those values and then actually using them to solve. Here was our perpendicular line, so knowing that it's the opposite of the reciprocal slope. Another table, interpreting that in context. And this one, they gave us an actual graph. So this is where you could find the x-intercept and the y-intercept, and that could help you to find the equation. And they didn't have us find the equation in slope-intercept form. we define it in standard form, which would be ax plus by equals c. You don't need to memorize standard form because as long as you know slope-intercept form really well and you're strong in your algebra skills, you would be able to get it into this form by just interpreting the variables. But it's something that if you're comfortable with it, it could save you some time. So knowing ax plus by equals c could help you. I don't think it's worth necessarily memorizing how you can use the a, the b, and the c value to quickly find the slope or to quickly find the y-intercept, because again, as long as you know how to get it from standard form into slope-intercept form, then it's easy to find the slope and y-intercept without adding too much time. And if you think you memorized it, but you aren't 100% confident, you'd probably want to do that anyway. Another one that gave us a line that's graphed on a set of axes. You have to know how to interpret what the slope is from this graph and how to interpret the y-intercept. Just, be watchful if they do something like this. You can see on the graph that these are more rectangles than squares, even though it's going up by 2, up by 2. This is going up by 2, up by 2. So, don't just go, oh, well, this doesn't look like the slope is -1. Well, that's because it's not perfectly scaled so that the x and y changes are the same. Here is similar to one that was further down. You had to use distributive property to get it into proper slope-intercept form, and then you could from there interpret what the slope is. Another word problem that's tied to geometry. You don't really need to be super strong in geometry to be able to figure it out, but just more interpreting the question. So it's a reading comprehension mixed with algebra. And a table used to find the slope and the y-intercept. In this case, I know there were some that were earlier on. They gave us when x is equal to 0, what's the y value? That's giving you the y-intercept value. But you can always solve for it once you have the slope by just working forwards or backwards. Here's another word problem. This one, you just set up an equation and then you can solve for one of the variables with it. Here's another one they gave it to you in standard form. You have to find the slope. So you could memorize it as -a over b is your slope. But again, I think to me, it's just, I'd be more comfortable to just convert it into slope-intercept form, and then you'll be very confident in your answer. It doesn't take that much longer. Obviously, if you've memorized that slope equals -a over b, you could do this question in basically 2 seconds. But finding it as by getting it into slope-intercept form will only take like 10 or 15 if you know what you're doing. Here we have one that was given in standard form, and then they said it was shifted down. So this is a problem that I would really recommend getting into slope-intercept form first, and then doing that downward shift. Now you could use this, and if you've memorized how to find your y-intercept from standard form, then you could just use that y-intercept and then shift it down by 5. But I really don't think that saves you too much time. Again, it's really dependent on your comfort level with standard form. Another one that gave you the points, you have to identify the equation of the line by using your y-intercept and finding the slope. Yeah, you can see like a lot of them had to do with slope, y-intercept, interpreting equations, interpreting graphs of the lines on a coordinate axes, interpreting word problems so that you can find your slope, your intercept, interpreting what the different coefficients mean in different word problems, and being comfortable enough with standard form and particularly with slope-intercept form. Another word problem one. They do like these ones that have to do with the number of acres. If you saw the same format came up at least twice. So, make sure that you've done at least some of those practice ones going in. Not that they're super obscure, but just so that it's something you're really comfortable with. They do like to reuse similar formats. And here's another slope. This one's a parallel line. Just make sure that you're 100% confident on parallel versus perpendicular. For me, those words I think parallel and it comes up immediately. Like I'm thinking of 2 parallel lines. Perpendicular, I immediately think like that sounds like a sharper word anyway. But I've heard those enough and used them enough in math classes that I don't get them mixed up. But I've had students who do get them mixed up. And one student said that they remembered it like this. Well, parallel has 2 L's next to each other. Right? So you can think of like the 2 L's in parallel are parallel. And then perpendicular, they were telling me something about the perpendicular, the P and the D, if you draw them a certain way, kind of look like right angles. I think that, maybe that's a little bit more of a stretch. Or maybe the P and D, something like the tops and the bottoms of those are perpendicular. Again, that's kind of a stretch, but you could just think of, well, if the 2 terms are parallel and perpendicular, parallel having the L's that are parallel like that. And I know there's an L in perpendicular as well, and you could say like the D and the P are parallel, but this literally looks like the parallel symbol. Whereas perpendicular, again, maybe that extra P, that extra D, you could think of those as looking kind of like right angles. Even if that's a little bit out there, maybe it will be something that will stick in your head to help you remember them. But just make sure parallel, they have the same slope. If you think of what parallel lines are, that makes sense. Perpendicular, they're going to have opposite reciprocal slopes, which again, if you think of what perpendicular means, that they meet at a right angle, that makes sense, right? If one's going up, the other one has to be going down. If one is really steep, the other one should be flat. If one is flat, the other one has to be steep. Again, parallel perpendicular lines. And yeah, so those are the main concepts that will come up in the medium level of difficulty for linear equations in two variables. The hard difficulty ones will be coming up soon. We'll say that they'll probably deal with similar concepts. There'll be a lot of word problems, slope, y-intercept, but it will just be slightly harder context. Maybe a little bit more reading comprehension will be involved in some of the word problems. But if you have any questions, any concerns, if you found any errors that I made or have recommendations for better ways to do those problems, if there's even just a question that I went over it, maybe you kind of get it, but you think I could do a clearer explanation, just comment that below. I really appreciate the feedback, and thank you for watching.